Have you ever imagined what it would be like to challenge the greatest empire in history, armed only with courage and the desire for freedom? Spartacus, the gladiator who defied Rome, not only dared to dream of freedom, but led a revolt so powerful that it shook the foundations of the Roman Republic. How did a simple slave manage to gather an army of thousands and humiliate the most feared legions in the world? The story of Spartacus goes far beyond the gladiatorial arenas. It is a saga of resistance, courage, and strategy. We will tell you everything about the story of this legendary gladiator. Spartacus emerged in one of the most turbulent times of the Roman Republic, when social inequalities were at their peak and slavery was the economic basis of the most powerful empire in the world. Originally from Thrace, a region where parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey are today located, he was initially a soldier in the service of Rome, before being enslaved for disobedience or desertion. Sold as a gladiator, he was taken to the training school in Capua, where his strength and combat skill attracted attention. However, Spartacus was not just a skilled fighter. He possessed a vision that transcended the blood-soaked arenas. He saw something more valuable in freedom than the fleeting glory of combat. Spartacus was born free, around 100 BC, in the region of Thrace, a territory marked by vast mountainous landscapes, dense forests, and a people known for their ferocity in combat. Thrace, situated at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, was inhabited by warlike tribes that were often involved in internal conflicts and resisted external rule, especially the growing Roman power. In this hostile and turbulent environment, Spartacus grew up, learning the art of survival and combat from an early age. Although the exact details of his early life are hazy, it is likely that Spartacus grew up in a humble family, facing the typical hardships of a young Thracian in a region constantly threatened by war and invasion. Like many from his homeland, he would have been exposed to the war culture of his tribe, where courage on the battlefield was an essential attribute for achieving respect and recognition. At some point in his youth, Spartacus enlisted in the Roman army. The practice of recruiting young people from conquered provinces was common for Rome, which used these soldiers to reinforce its legions and maintain control over distant territories. In the army, Spartacus would have received rigorous training in military tactics, weapon handling, and hand-to-hand combat. It was here that he developed the skills he would later use to challenge the very empire that trained him. However, the life of a Roman soldier was far from easy, especially for those of provincial origin. Spartacus would have faced strict discipline, long marches, and a deep sense of discontent at being forced to fight on behalf of a power he had little respect for. This discontent culminated in an act of desertion. Refusing to fight against his own people, perhaps in one of the Roman campaigns to subdue Thracian tribes, Spartacus abandoned the ranks of the army. The desertion, considered an unforgivable betrayal by Rome, had severe consequences. Spartacus was captured, probably by Roman troops or mercenaries hired to pursue deserters. As was common practice, deserters were sentenced to slavery, not only as punishment but also as a warning to others who might consider challenging Rome's authority. Destined for the arena, he was sent to the Lentulus Batiatus training school in Capua, where he began a new phase of his life. Although reduced to the status of a slave, Spartacus was no ordinary man. He carried with him the rebellious spirit of Thrace, the experience of a soldier, and, above all, a deep determination to regain his freedom. Upon arriving at the gladiatorial school in Capua, Spartacus found himself in an environment designed to turn men into killing machines. The city, located about 120 miles from Rome, was famous for its arenas and lucrative gladiatorial trade. Under Lentulus Batiatus, the school was more than a training site. It was a prison where life and death were negotiated for the entertainment of the Roman elite and people. From the beginning, Spartacus stood out among the gladiatorial slaves. His physical strength and natural ability with weapons quickly caught the attention of trainers. More than just a warrior, Spartacus demonstrated a sharp intellect and natural leadership that set him apart. Despite the inhumane conditions and violence that permeated his training, he earned the respect of his companions, not only for his combat prowess, but for the solidarity he demonstrated. It was in this oppressive environment that Spartacus met other gladiators with whom he shared not only the desire for freedom, but also the indignation against the system that turned them into spectacles. Among these men was Crixus, a Gaul of extraordinary strength and fierce temper. Crixus and Spartacus developed a relationship that was, at the same time, one of friendship and strategic alliance. Together, they began to plan something few dared even imagine: escaping and challenging the structure that held them captive. The Gladiator School was a place where survival required both cunning and strength. Spartacus, alongside Crixus and others like Castus and Gannicus, began to plant the seeds of rebellion, gaining the trust and support of his colleagues. With a bond forged through suffering and daily struggle, the gladiators saw in Spartacus a leader who could turn their dreams of freedom into reality. The arena had made them warriors, but it had also ignited in them an unshakable determination that life should be something more than a series of battles to entertain others. One night in 73 BC, under cover of darkness, Spartacus and his companions put into practice the plan they had been meticulously devising. With improvised utensils such as kitchen knives and everyday tools, they attacked the guards at the Gladiator School in Capua. The fighting was fierce, but the gladiators' skill in hand-to-hand combat prevailed. Blood was shed, but in the end, the school gates were open and 74 slaves had escaped. Of the more than 200 captives there, only these few managed to accompany Spartacus on his escape to freedom. With weapons taken from the guards and the military knowledge Spartacus carried from his days as a Roman soldier, the group not only escaped but also began to organize. They knew that Rome would not tolerate their rebellion and that the response would be swift and brutal. Thus, their initial priority was to find refuge and supplies to survive. Fleeing inland, the group plundered farms and villages, accumulating provisions and reinforcing their arsenal. Although they were few in number, their determination and discipline began to transform a group of desperate fugitives into a potentially dangerous force. News of the escape quickly reached Roman authorities, but it was initially treated as a minor incident. Rome, accustomed to scattered slave revolts, considered the uprising a local threat that could be resolved with a modest deployment of soldiers. This underestimation would be a fatal error. Spartacus, taking advantage of Rome's initial neglect, focused his efforts on training his companions and consolidating his leadership over the group. He instituted a discipline that united slaves under a common cause: fighting for freedom at any cost. The first significant confrontation was not long in coming. A small contingent of Roman soldiers was sent to capture the fugitives and restore order. However, what the Romans found was not a disorganized group of slaves, but a force led by a skilled strategist and trained gladiators who knew combat tactics well. The battle was quick and decisive. Spartacus and his men ambushed the Romans, using the terrain to their advantage and defeating the troops with impressive efficiency. The looting of the Roman camp provided a new supply of weapons and armor, further reinforcing the group. From that moment on, Spartacus stopped being a fugitive and became a symbol. He personified the possibility of facing and overcoming oppression, even against an enemy as powerful as Rome. As the number of his followers grew, he expanded his base of operations and continued to defeat the armies sent against him. The Roman Republic, accustomed to dealing with smaller, localized revolts, began to realize that it was facing a much greater threat. Spartacus, the Thracian gladiator, was turning his personal struggle into one of the greatest slave revolts in history. As news of Spartacus's victories spread like wildfire across Italy, His rebellion became an irresistible call to slaves and oppressed people everywhere. Fleeing farms, villages, and even Roman cities, thousands of men, women, and children joined the movement. What began as a small, disciplined group of gladiators transformed, in less than a year, into a colossal army of approximately 100,000 people, encompassing all layers of enslaved and marginalized society. This army was extraordinarily different. It included veteran gladiators, accustomed to the brutality of combat, who formed the military backbone of the group. Alongside them were rural slaves, many of whom had never held a weapon, but who were driven by a fierce determination to fight for their freedom. There were also women and children, who, although they did not participate directly in the battles, played essential roles in logistical support, caring for the wounded, preparing food, and helping to sustain the group. Interestingly, even former Roman soldiers, who had fallen from grace and been enslaved, joined the cause, bringing with them valuable military knowledge. Dealing with such a diverse army was a challenge that Spartacus met with exceptional skill. He established a system that promoted equality within the group, sharing the spoils of war fairly. There was no distinction between those who had been gladiators or simple peasants. Everyone was treated as equal in the pursuit of freedom. This practice not only strengthened internal harmony, but also increased loyalty to Spartacus, who was seen as a fair and compassionate leader. This sense of equality was revolutionary in a rigidly hierarchical society like the Romans and highlighted rebellion as something deeper than a simple armed revolt. In addition to the equal division of loot, Spartacus showed special care in maintaining high morale. He inspired his followers with speeches and appeared accessible, sharing the difficulties and dangers faced by everyone. This close leadership made many see him not just as a commander, but as a living symbol of resistance and hope. Although the growth of the rebel army was impressive, it also brought challenges. The logistics of feeding, arming, and coordinating such a large group was a monumental task. Spartacus, however, knew how to adapt his tactics. He continued to use quick and unpredictable movements, avoiding disadvantageous confrontations and always seeking the element of surprise. At the same time, he took advantage of his increasing numbers to intimidate his enemies and demonstrate that the rebellion was not a passing threat, but a force that Rome could no longer ignore. Despite his victories and increasing numbers, he knew that the rebel army, made up of a mix of experienced fighters and untrained people, would never be a match for the Roman legions in a prolonged direct confrontation. Rome's generals were beginning to take the rebellion seriously, and military reinforcements increased with each defeat they suffered. Spartacus needed a strategy that would ensure the survival of his movement while keeping the flame of freedom alive among his followers. Determined to avoid annihilation, Spartacus adopted guerrilla tactics. Moving quickly through difficult terrain, he struck where the Romans were least prepared, using ambushes and lightning attacks to inflict maximum damage before disappearing into the mountains or forests. This approach not only disoriented the Romans, but also boosted the morale of his followers, who saw his leadership as a beacon of cunning and courage. However, Spartacus knew that time was not on his side. The Roman army was relentless and its resources were practically infinite. So he formulated a bold plan: march into northern Italy, cross the Alps, and take his people beyond the reach of Rome. The idea was simple and ambitious: reach territories beyond Roman influence, where his followers could find safety and possibly return to their homelands. For Spartacus, this was the chance to turn the rebellion into a triumphant escape. However, Spartacus' decision led to tensions within his army. Not everyone shared his vision of escaping Rome. Crixus, his ally and close friend, was one of those who disagreed. He believed that, with the growing number of rebels, it was possible to directly confront the Roman forces and even march on Rome. This disagreement led to the division of the army. Crixus, accompanied by around 30,000 followers, separated from Spartacus and decided to remain in southern Italy to confront the Roman legions. This decision, however, proved fatal. Without Spartacus's strategic command, the group led by Crixus faced the full might of the legions and was defeated in a devastating battle. Crixus was killed, and the survivors were massacred or recaptured. The news of his allies' death enraged Spartacus, who not only mourned the loss of a companion but also saw the event as a blow to the morale of his rebellion. In response, Spartacus unleashed a series of vengeful attacks against Rome. He faced and defeated 2 consecutive Roman legions, using his tactical intelligence and the discipline of his fighters. These victories were a powerful statement that the rebellion was still a force to be feared. Spartacus wasn't just fighting for freedom. He was sending a clear message to Rome. Every blow struck against his followers would be met with relentless force. The Roman defeats, however, only intensified the Republic's effort to put down the revolt. The Roman Senate finally recognized the seriousness of the threat. Previous defeats had embarrassed the Republic, and pressure to crush the revolt was growing. Determined to restore order, the senators entrusted command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest and most ambitious men in Rome. Crassus was not only a strategist, but also a ruthless man, willing to use all available resources to ensure his victory. He gathered an army of 60,000 soldiers, including experienced legionnaires and recruits, and marched south, determined to put an end to the rebellion once and for all. Crassus brought to the battlefield an approach that Spartacus had not yet faced: the methodical patience of a siege. Instead of pursuing the rebel army in direct confrontations, Crassus blocked all escape routes, cutting off supplies and isolating the rebels in southern Italy. Spartacus, always cunning, knew he needed a way out to avoid being surrounded and destroyed. In an act of desperation, he tried to negotiate with pirates to transport his army to Sicily. The island, famous for its wealth and strategic location, could offer a new stronghold for the rebels. However, the pirates who promised support betrayed Spartacus. They abandoned the deal, leaving him without transportation and vulnerable. Crassus' siege tightened every day. The rebel army, although still numerous, faced food shortages and morale began to suffer. In 71 BC, the fate of the rebellion led by Spartacus reached a critical moment. Isolated in southern Italy, with scarce resources and an army depleted by hunger and the relentless siege of Marcus Licinius Crassus, Spartacus knew that the final battle was inevitable. Although surrounded and outnumbered, he was unwilling to surrender. For the rebels, the fight was not just for survival, but for what was left of their dignity and freedom. Spartacus, as leader, embodied the spirit of unwavering resistance. The plain where the confrontation took place was transformed into a field of death and hope. Crassus, with his organized and disciplined legions, positioned himself to cut off any escape route, ensuring that this would be the decisive battle. Spartacus, in turn, gathered his men together for the last time, telling them about the freedom they had fought so hard for and the meaning of facing death standing up as free men instead of living as slaves. When the confrontation began, the rebel army advanced with ferocity. Even with inferior weapons and a less organized formation, Spartacus' followers fought with an intensity that surprised the Romans. Spartacus, always at the head of his troops, personally led the attack. He carried a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, a symbol of the courage that had inspired thousands to join him. At the height of the battle, Spartacus focused his attention on Crassus. He knew that if he could hit the Roman commander, he could destabilize the legions and perhaps turn the tide of the battle. Making way between the Roman soldiers with almost superhuman strength, Spartacus advanced towards Crassus, determined to catch up with the general on the battlefield. His charge was an act of desperate courage, and each blow of his sword seemed to echo the cry for freedom he carried in his heart. All around him, his men fought fiercely, inspired by their leader's example. Even knowing that defeat was inevitable, each rebel seemed determined to sell his life as dearly as possible. As the battle intensified, the Roman legions, disciplined and superior in numbers, began to gain ground. Spartacus, surrounded by enemies, continued to fight with an almost legendary fury, as if his spirit could not be contained. Roman reports say that he killed countless soldiers on his way, always advancing towards the center of the enemy forces, where Crassus commanded his troops. However, the crushing weight of numbers and physical exhaustion finally took their toll. Spartacus was killed in combat, his attempt to reach Crassus thwarted by the wall of soldiers separating him from his target. His body, however, was never identified. Mixed among the thousands of dead on the battlefield, Spartacus disappeared, leaving a void that Rome would never forget. Some believe he fell anonymously, like the thousands of slaves who had fought at his side. Others maintain that his body was deliberately hidden, perhaps as a symbolic gesture that his struggle could not be erased from the collective memory. The defeat marked the end of the rebellion. Of the thousands who fought alongside Spartacus, most were killed on the battlefield. The survivors faced grim fates. Some 6,000 of them were crucified along the Appian Way, a cruel demonstration of Rome's power and a warning to anyone who dared challenge the system. However, Spartacus' legacy transcended the brutality of his defeat. He became more than a gladiator or a rebel leader. It became a symbol of resistance against oppression and an icon of the struggle for freedom. His story has been told and retold throughout the centuries, highlighting his courage and leadership. Although some see him as a man marked by violence and destruction caused by his followers, many recognize Spartacus as an idealist, someone who dared to dream of a world where slavery and inequality did not determine the destiny of men. He challenged the greatest empire of his time not with a professional army or sophisticated weapons, but with the strength of his followers' will and burning desire to be free. Their struggle did not destroy the Roman Republic, but it revealed the cracks in a system that based its prosperity on the exploitation of millions. As the centuries passed, the story of Spartacus continued to inspire generations. He was romanticized as a folk hero, a leader who stood up against tyranny and injustice. Now, we want to know, what do you think about Spartacus? Was he a revolutionary hero, a brilliant strategist, or simply a man trying to survive? Tell us your opinion here in the comments. If you liked what you saw and want to continue exploring the fascinating world of ancient Rome, don't forget to leave a like. This helps us know that you appreciate our content and want more of it here. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe to the channel and press the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. And if you want to deepen your knowledge about ancient Rome even further, don't miss the next video. Click on the screen to learn more about the tragic end of Crassus, the richest man in Rome.